All right, thank you, and good morning. It's more like good afternoon for me, being from the East Coast and having flown here and just arrived just in the nick of time. What Sri and I are going to talk a bit about today is the role of standards in driving interoperability. I'm going to give a bit of a high-level perspective to get started, and then I'm going to hand it off about halfway through to Sri, who's going to give a bit more perspective from the market in India. A lot of what he does is looking on a global scale as we've been trying to become a more and more global organization. Sri provides a great perspective on some of the things that we're seeing in the Indian market currently. Really the three themes that we're focusing on are first moving from the early adoption stage to a mass acceptance. What are the key aspects that are in there? What are the lessons that we've learned from other industries, not only within IEEE, but Sri and I's own personal experience in our careers as well. Talk a bit about the drivers that really push you towards mass adoption of emerging technologies as well. And when it comes to standards, there is certainly an aspect of timing it right. While standards can drive interoperability, there is a bit of subtlety in terms of how you time what standardization you do at what given point to make things work and not be inhibitive. So the first question I always like to start any of my talks off with, how many folks here are familiar with the IEEE or IEEE members? Okay, that's not too bad. I mean, sometimes we give a talk on something and only 10% of people know what IEEE is. So I won't have to get into too much on this, but we are the world's largest professional association for the advancement of technology. Basically, it's an engineering society or an engineering association, 400,000 plus members covering just about any spectrum of engineering community that you can think of. While we're widely known for publications and conferences, people are sometimes less aware of all the standardization work that goes on at the IEEE. And I think the parts of it that are most relatable to folks in the AR space, if you think about a lot of the communication standards, anything that goes from having to do with wireless technologies, Ethernet, all the 802 standards, all of that comes out of the IEEE Standards Association. But that's really only a part of it because, as mentioned in my introduction, I actually have a big background in power and engineering as well. So interoperability and the standards that drive interoperability are the things that have created the drive for a smart grid, for example. As we see more smart meters and different applications in the power space, standards has been noted as a driver on that. And so we're looking at some of the parallels where we can facilitate that same type of acceleration of new technologies in the augmented reality space. And I do mention here within the IEEE, we do a number of initiatives. So they're not always necessarily currently developing standards, but very often they're areas that are emerging. So Internet of Things, big data, e-health, all of these are initiatives that we have, and all of them actually have strong connections with augmented reality as well. So as mentioned, if I drill down to the Standards Association itself, what you see in that little blue upper quadrant up there is standards development. That's really what we tend to be known for. And again, 802 is the example that people are most familiar with, developing the standards, lots of working groups, people getting together and reaching consensus on these standards. But that's really only a part of the picture. One of the things that I think is very important towards standards is the green section, the pre-standardization. Many of our augmented reality initiatives are taking part in there, where what we've been doing is trying to pull together interest groups in various aspects of AR and really creating communities that are thinking about the long term of where standards may be going for AR, and where the implementation opportunities for AR, how does it apply to e-health, how does it apply to IoT? A lot of work going on in those areas that are not the traditional standards development, but they're really setting the groundwork for the standards development of, say, 5 years from now. Sometimes it could be 2 years from now, sometimes it could be 10, but it's really trying to look forward to where the industry can most benefit from standardization activities. And then the orange section up there was noted in the last talk, conformity assessment and conformance testing came up. We've been increasing our presence, helping out on conformity assessment initiatives, interop test events, a lot of things of that nature, because really those very often drive interoperability. They show the places where standards are needed, where standards need to be enhanced. So really looking at that complete life cycle from emerging technology to standards development to how standards get implemented in the long run. So I mentioned a little bit about this already. We tend to look at, and this is a bit high level, I think the last talk was really great at drilling into a specific area, but if we look at a high level, standards can be viewed as enabling augmented reality. If you look at many of the technologies over the past 10 to 20 years that have really gained widespread acceptance, very often there is an underlying aspect of standards. But as noted when I started, though, when you do those standards is very critical. Some people want to jump right into a standard, and what can happen is that it's going to create problems with innovation. If you try to standardize too early before all the options are fleshed out, you can start locking into things that maybe you'll regret in the long run. On the other hand, you could start a little bit too late, and that way you start getting into competing technologies and competing standards that are out there that in the long run is going to hurt interoperability. Is that a 5-minute warning, considering I only started 3 minutes ago? Well, I'll be like on the Tony Awards or the Grammy Awards. I'll just keep talking while the music goes on. So, the timing is really an interesting aspect when it comes to standards. What you don't want to get into is an issue where you have incompatible proprietary solutions. Inevitably, you are going to see some of that, but the question is, how can groups come together to actually alleviate that problem and use the standards process to their best advantage? When it comes to any new technology, perceived value is really the critical case. We can have lots of cool and new technologies that are coming out, and very often we cannot say, we're creating it because we can create it without necessarily looking at the big picture. But there's always the issue of usefulness. Is this something that people really want? Is it practical? Just because we can do it is not always the right way. It's like, what can we do that's actually going to provide the value? And certainly the other side of the coin is cost effectiveness. Again, getting back into proprietary solutions that you run into without standardization. Having standards, having multi-vendor interoperability really can lead to lower costs. It can drive the market in terms of more organizations being able to provide the solutions that are going to work together to provide that value, whether it's to the consumer, whether it's to the industrial base. And most of all, interoperability certainly increases the possibility for flexibility within systems. What you don't want necessarily, and we're going to let Sri go into this in just a minute, you really don't want to have a situation where maybe one country's created its own ecosystem, and so Sri may talk about, in the case of India, they may be developing certain platforms and products that may be incompatible if somebody moved from India to the U.S. You really want a global solution that's looking at standardization and interoperability, because otherwise you don't get that universal uptake that's going to drive that mass adoption. I know I'm talking very quick. I'm going to try to hand it off to Sri in the interest of trying to make up some of the time. So I will take your seat, and I'll turn it over to Sri to talk about India.
So I guess we have 3 minutes till the schedule stop. Maybe I will take a couple of more minutes. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so what I will talk in the next few slides is about some of the verticals and the regions, and also the challenges of AR adoption that we are seeing. And I don't think the problems are just in India. I think some of those challenges are much more broader. So one thing when we talk about any segment is one of the aspects is one of verticals, what are the technology requirements that drive standards adoption, but also how these technologies are adopted across regions, So we need to find the commonalities. We don't want to duplicate the efforts in developing the common platforms, but you have to understand that when you deploy a technology across regions, there are certain regional variations, there are certain regional policy issues, and that needs to be considered when you define the platform and you define the system itself. So when Rudi asked me to talk a little bit about India, I started digging into the details, and I was a little bit surprised at the amount of take-up on AR in India. which I was frankly not aware. I hear a lot about AR applications outside India, but definitely in India, it's certainly gathering steam. They are saying that the market in 2013, though small, it's about $20 million. That kind of surprised me. One of the biggest take-ups in India has been from the media side. In fact, these days it's pretty common to open a newspaper in India, and every ad comes with a sort of an AR app along with it. So you just put your AR app on top of the newspaper on the ad, and it's a full platform that you get. You can book your test rides for a car. You can just look at the engines. The whole works. It's quite amazing. But what I found amazing is, and that has really taken AR to the consumers, is wedding invitation cards are getting printed in AR applications. I think we are making weddings very complicated these days. It's so what are the challenges that we see in AR adoption? Standardization still, I think we had quite a few talks. We talked about the verticals. There has been quite a lot on the website. But definitely, it's if you look at technology evolution, standardization is still in its early stages. Especially if you look at the critical healthcare systems and the complexity of models, the algorithms are still not accurate enough to be used in such kind of environments. And the device capability versus the complexity of computational algorithms, still there needs to be, we need to find a balance there. Of course, just because we can do it doesn't mean it will lead to widespread adoption. There needs to be a purpose that drives these initiatives. So what are the drivers for widespread AR adoption? Of course, AR is extremely cool. It's something that attracts all age groups. Very young people get used to these technologies very quickly. It's a different platform. It's a live platform. It is easy to use and intuitive. But of course, as Rudi mentioned, proprietary solutions might ignite some of the early adopters, but as we move towards maturity, we need to at least look at the broader aspects of standardization, which will be driven through standards. Standards and interoperability as drivers, leveraging standards as a tool without constraining innovation, and they do make things work together. Today, it is impossible to live a life without the internet. Can you imagine if HTTP wasn't there, or if internet protocols were not there? Going back 30 years, in the last 30 years, we have seen a lot of changes. In fact, today we cannot live without Wi-Fi. The first thing we do in fact, today I think we are making life very miserable by putting Wi-Fi on the planes. I think that was 3 hours that you got for yourself, but I think we are crashing that world. I see a lot of people now pretty actively on their Wi-Fi, hopefully on Facebook, I guess. So interoperability is key, and we have seen this time and again across technologies, and in quite a few technologies, we seem to be reinventing the wheel. If you look at cloud computing, for example, we did not learn the lessons that we took from the internet, and we are talking about now IEEE is working on how to make clouds work across each other. Interoperability was not a design consideration when they looked at it. We are hoping that we don't see such kind of similar challenges in augmented reality, where we have such fragmentation of proprietary standards and applications, and then somebody is bringing up a top-level framework to integrate these things. I think those might work in the short term, but not in the long term. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Rudi and Sri? Please repeat the question into the microphone.
Sure, I'll do that.
Given you're a standards organization, what's the kind of path to any kind of IEEE standards on AR? And just as a follow-up, could you talk a little bit more about what's going on with AR in India?
Okay. So the question was, what is the path for standardization and what is happening in AR in India? Okay. So within the IEEE, it's fairly easy to develop standards. The AR standards are primarily driven out of the IEEE Computer Society. Standardization can be initiated by anybody, a person or an organization. So all you need is an idea, identify a gap, and the methodology that we adopt is we have something called a project authorization request. It's a very simple one-pager form that you submit to the IEEE Computer Society Standards Board. They will review it, and once it's approved, you create a working group. We send out flyers across our community for people to join that community, and off you go. It typically takes about a year or two, depending on the maturity of the idea, and there's a particular process that the working groups adopt. Rudi, any further?
Yeah, I was going to add that there are
Yep.
project proposals that have actually launched now, as well as having some of these interest groups that we've got. So in the last 6 to 9 months, we're actually starting to see some groups and standard projects form.
Yeah, in fact, we started one about a couple of months ago. It's called IEEE 1589. It's called Augmented Reality Learning Experience. Oh, there you go. Chris. Chris is there. So learning experience. Oh, okay. So Arlem is its nickname. So it's a pretty cool nickname.
So can we find out what is being discussed in the working groups without joining? Do you have to join?
Chris can answer that question. I mean, the chair can answer that question.
Particular working group, if you go to arlem.kmi.open.ac.uk,
Oh,
just approach me, I'll give you a card.
I'll talk to you later.
Transparent.
Yeah. Yeah, typically joining a working group is not expensive within the IEEE. In fact, if it is a individual working group, you can sign up to the reflector. It doesn't require any IEEE membership or any sort of membership, just some interest, and you should be able to get all the information. Talking about AR in India, I think from the previous question, standardization work hasn't happened. It's mainly driven by media today. A lot more work is happening on the app side than any specific standards activities. But that's where I'm trying to bring in that community into platforms like this. Thank you. Go ahead.
Curious, what sort of awareness is there for the consumer, the average consumer, to know that there's an AR-capable ad for the media ad?
You are talking in India or in general? So in India, I think it's interesting actually. I started learning quite a lot in the last few months when I started digging into the market in India, and a lot of the world heritage sites now they are AR enabled. So if you go to a World Heritage Site, temples, pilgrimage places, they have AR, they try to upload an app on your phone, and then you have a live experience platform. It's a historical learning. If you look at the mobile presence in India, it has really grown quite a lot. So anything that you can do in a mobile is something that will take up very fast. The market for smartphones is still small, but now at the cost of the smartphones, I think within the next 5 years, I think it'll be ubiquitous, like chatting on Skype or something like that. So.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The IEEE, I happen to know, is well positioned to help guide AR technologies on many different fronts, and I'm excited to see what they're going to be doing for us.
And I'll add, we have some booth space, so feel free to stop by with other questions you may think of based on this presentation or some of the other ones that we're talking about. Sri and I will be down there pretty regularly.